morning. Some years ago when I was working with some welfare workers who were part of our church, they came to me and said, look, we've been caring for some people on the streets as we do, and there's a group of them been living in a squat, and one of them has died. And everyone's upset and grieving. He was much loved, and we've had a lot to do with him. We'd all like to be able to celebrate his life. Is there any way you'd be able to do a funeral service for him? I said, absolutely, yeah. So we contacted the undertaker that had the contract for what's called paupers funerals, for funerals of people who don't have family or money to be able to take care of these things when they die. And the undertaker said, look, we'd be more than happy for you to take a funeral. We usually have a group of other deceased people, and we do a service for them all in a simple way when we can. We've got 5 other people. Would you be willing to do a service for the 6? I said, sure, yeah, okay. They said, we don't think anyone will turn up for any of these other funerals, so it'll be just your group. So we turned up to Rookwood Cemetery. The welfare workers had brought the homeless people together, his friends, and cleaned them up and got them some other clothes and ferried them out there in minibuses. Went to the back of Rookwood Cemetery where there's a special place, and there were the 6 coffins, but there was another group of people for one of the others who had died, and they wanted to remember as well. And so we did this service, and we invited them to share stories of their friend, and the homeless people and welfare workers shared stories of this person. We named all of the 6 people, and we had a service and dignified them in death. Celebrated lives that were now anonymous for a few of them. And in that experience, and working with those welfare workers, I discovered a whole different world that I wasn't really aware of people who live on the streets, people who are homeless, people who are often anonymous, but who are people. And these welfare workers treated them as human beings and helped them to be embraced into their communities and supported them where they were able to, and wanted to dignify them and honour them in life and death. I think these experiences that I had helped me to understand this reading, this passage from Mark's story of Jesus this week. One that I calculated I've studied and read and over about 13 times over about 30 years, every time this cycle of readings comes around. It's a typical Markan intercalation or sandwich story where he starts one story, injects another story, and then finishes the first. Sometimes the stories are related and sometimes they're quite different. But in each case, they interpret each other and they hold each other together, and we get something deeper from them. In this case, it begins with the story about Jairus. Jairus was a leading official in the synagogue, responsible for the good administration, proper working of the synagogue. He had high honour, status in the society. His 12-year-old daughter was desperately ill and near death. I imagine Jairus had tried everything. I imagine he'd had access to healers and physicians and people who'd prayed and all sorts of people, to no avail. And so, hearing Jesus is in town, in sheer desperation, he throws himself at Jesus' feet and begs that he will come and lay hands on his daughter and maybe make her well. This is Jesus, the heretic, that the religious leaders are opposing and hate and are plotting against and are demonised. But in desperation, Jairus comes to him. And Jesus agrees, but there's a huge crowd around them. You can just imagine Jairus kind of pushing his way through the crowd, separate. And with someone of high status and honour in the society, people probably would separate, pulling Jesus through. Come on, we've got to get there quickly. Then all of a sudden Jesus stops, and this is the second story. And he says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples say, "What are you on about, Jesus? What do you mean, who touched you? You're in the midst of a crowd. Everyone's touched you." And Jesus ignores them and says, "Who touched me?" In the middle of the crowd is a woman, a woman who has had a serious menstrual bleed for 12 years and it won't stop. It says that she's been to physicians and healers and paid out money and received nothing in return. She's destitute, broke, poor, and desperate. She's unclean. She's ritually unclean and probably excluded from much of the community life because of this uncleanness, that impurity that comes from being of a bleed and blood. And until she's healed and cured and then has a ritual of cleanliness, she can't participate, particularly in the life of the synagogue, the religious and worship life. She's desperate. She has no one to advocate for her. She's someone of no status, no position in society. She's anonymous, marginalised and pushed to the edges. Much like those homeless people and Brian, whose funeral I did. Unknown, anonymous, despised, marginalised. This woman, in sheer desperation, sees Jesus, perhaps has heard the story, and says, if only I can reach out and touch his cloak, grab his cloak, perhaps I can be made well. Maybe she understands that the contagion of her impurity, her uncleanness, is transmittable, that if she touches another, they become unclean. Maybe with Jesus, it goes the other way, that his purity and his healing can flow backwards into her. Whatever it is, it's a desperate faith. And she does. She reaches out and holds the hem of his garment and immediately feels something in her. And Jesus, it said, feels something in him, a power go out of him. And that's why he stops and says, who touched me? And finally this woman comes and kneels at his feet, the same posture as Jairus. And Jesus gives her the opportunity to explain her story, to share her story. The injustice, the marginalisation, the inhumanity that she's experienced. And then he says, daughter. He gives her an identity. You are now a daughter, a child of God. Daughter, go. Your faith has made you well. He affirms her for her faith. One of only 2 people in Mark's Gospel that has that affirmation of faith. She's a faithful person. And this story is about faith. Faith that brings life and hope into the deepest darkness of human life and the life of the world. Anyway, Jairus, I can only imagine, is beside himself. Time is of essence, and Jesus is wasting time with this woman. This outcast woman, this marginalised woman. She'll be sick tomorrow. He can come back and fix her tomorrow or later today. My daughter is dying, and he is wasting time. And at that moment, one of the household comes up and says, Jairus, don't worry the teacher anymore. Your daughter is dead. And I can't imagine Jairus' grief, the pain he feels. He of great honour and status, he, the head of the household, has not been able to protect and save his daughter. He's failed. And his grief would be deep. But Jesus turns to him and says, Jairus, don't worry. Your daughter's just asleep. She's not dead. Let's go. And so they go to the house, and there the professional mourners are already in place, the people who help with all the stuff of death, the work of death. And Jesus asks, where is this girl? And they say, it's too late, she's dead. And he says, she's not dead, she's only asleep. And they start laughing and deriding him. Their wailing and mourning turns into derision. And Jesus says, get out, and drives them out. And takes the inner sanctum of disciples, Peter, James and John, and the parents to the room. And he says to the girl, he takes her hand and says, Talitha cum, rise up, little girl. And she does. And she walks. He tells the family and the disciples, tell no one what you've seen. It's a story that for our culture, we immediately go to a woman who touches a hem and is healed, a girl who is dead who is resuscitated, and we get stuck there. I don't think for Mark's community they were the issues. The issues were more around a marginalised woman who is elevated to this level of daughter, who is healed and cured of her illness before the honourable person's daughter is healed. That they're both called daughter, and Jesus lifts this woman up and ignores the daughter whilst he's healing her and dealing with her. And it is kind of this reversal of the world's order, that for the world, they would go straight and sort out Jairus. He's the honourable person. She's a nobody. But Jesus lifts her up first and then goes and deals with the daughter. In the story, they're connected. They both become daughters. Initially, this woman who is at the bottom of the social order and the girl who, by virtue of her father, is at the top. She's a daughter, has identity, has a place to belong. This woman has nothing. But by the end of the story, they're both daughters. This is a child of God, and she is loved by God. This woman has faith, and when they go, Jesus says to Jairus, have faith. Have the faith of the woman, the desperate faith of the woman. Trust. Trust. You are out of control, and you can never do it. You must let go and trust. And then there's the number 12. The woman has had a bleed for 12 years, the whole of this young daughter's life, who is 12 years old. She's reaching the point of womanhood where she will begin menstruating and she can be betrothed to marriage. And this woman is in a slow death through that menstrual bleed. This girl is in a quick death, dying quickly. And the number 12 also relates to the religious structures of the world, their world. 12 is the number of God's people in the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, the 12 tribes of Israel. In the New Covenant, the 12 disciples. And it pertains to this people of God. And Jesus, or Mark, is saying through Jesus' story that faith is the only thing that will lift this church, this religious being into life. When we forget the way of love, the way of relationship, the way of community that is inclusive, when we forget and push people to the margins and elevate others up and create an inequity and injustice, that's not the way of God. Faith will bring us into a place where we're all equal, not the same, but equal, where there's enough for everyone to share, and where the dishonourable are lifted up and become honourable children of God. And the honourable and those who are elevated unnecessarily are brought down, and we're all the same. We're all equal. We're all loved children of God. And we all are dependent on this way of God, this love, this compassion, this kindness, this generosity to give us life. And when we have faith in this way of love, this way of justice, this way of inclusive community and relationship, all is well. There is healing and there is life for the world. That's the way of Jesus. And we're invited into this way.